It's the end of March, which means it's Baylor Athletics' real time to shine. I'm talking spring football, baby. Let's get locked on Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show. Joining me, as she always does on Wednesdays, well, most Wednesdays, I will say. It is Wicker Wednesday. Sydney Wicker is here from Channel 6, KCEM. We're talking some spring football, just what we're looking for this year, and maybe some things that Dave Aranda said that will get you ready to run through a brick wall. Plus, was the writing on the wall for some of the players, the Baylor basketball players, entering the transfer portal? Sydney Wicker was there. She also had a front row seat to the biggest college sports story in America this week. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Sydney, don't you just love this cycle? You know, it's a tough, brutal ending for both men's and women's basketball teams. And thankfully for us in the world of college football in the great state of Texas, we get football that same week. This feels like you might not need it because that means you're going into like survival mode once you start talking football. But for us, the Baylor fans, we kind of need this right now.
Okay, I'm glad this can be good emotional support for you because
you're sacrificing again for us.
I need 4 coffees and all of the energy I can get right now. I just can we just have like a week? Like everybody gets spring break. Like, can we just get like 1 week of like maybe just baseball, just softball?
I was gonna say someone's out there just saying like, can we just be baseball? Can we just like have baseball for a week?
Yeah, just
opening day in MLB this week, and we get spring football. Like.
Oh, love it. But it's here. We're ready to go out there. I'm excited for this team and the energy and seeing where they picked up off of last season. So I'm ready for my return. I'm sad I missed the first practice though. Like they literally couldn't let the men just like get like we couldn't start on a Tuesday. Like if we started on that would be great.
And like, to be fair, they kind of know when the men are going to be done the second round. Anyway, this is something that Baylor fans need. Like, truly, we've been dying, thirsting for more football after what was really a disappointing men's basketball season kind of the whole way through. And so we've been dying to be like, oh, we're a football school again. Let's get back into football. You're obviously going to be at practices throughout this spring and starting, later this week. What are the things that you're looking for from spring practice? Obviously there's going to be a portal window soon, but like, what are the things that you are looking for as someone who's going to be on the sidelines for some of it?
I'm kind of just looking for actions to meet words. I've heard Coach Aranda speak a lot of big things about this team, and we're only 1 practice in, and I want to see it for myself. I mean, you only get to see so much during spring football and during spring games. Like, you don't really get to see a whole lot. But Coach Aranda compared this group, and after their first practice, he said it was one of the best first spring practices that he's ever seen. He compared this group a lot to the 2021 squad. So if you're going to say that,
I'm sorry,
exactly. I want to see what you're talking about.
The most successful team in Baylor football history, that 2021 squad, the 12-2 Big 12 champion, Sugar Bowl champion Baylor Bear squad.
That would be the one, yeah.
How did that? Was he just talking like intensity, like one of those intangible things that we can't really measure, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I just quickly listened to the presser, and pretty much all he just said was, he sees a lot of similarities in this group. He didn't go into it too much. He just kind of, that was what he led with. So he made a lot of comments about the defense too, saying they're making a good step in the right direction, which obviously a good area of improvement that needs to step up a little bit. And he said the quarterback room was one of the best that he's seen in a long time. So the competition level is there. The experience is there on a lot of levels. And he says a lot of the new guys are learning from the vets, which is really important. And they're just really shaping up to develop well here early on in the program.
That is interesting because in order to be compared to the 2021 team, after this year's team. Like, you have got to make a significant jump defensively. That was a top 10 defense in America. That's how they won their games. No disrespect to Gary Bohannon. He got the car in the garage. Let's say that. Abram Smith is a lot like Bryson Washington, but that team was not a high-powered offense. They set the Sugar Bowl record for sacks in a game. So, like, that's entirely what that team was built on. That's interesting, Sydney, because I know we're both looking for huge improvement on that side of the ball. And you're in a situation where you've got a couple new coaches on that side. You've got a couple new starters on that side. And again, with the spring portal window open, Baylor added some depth pieces and some starters in that window last year. So this might not even be the finished product of Baylor's defense. But like now I'm hung up on the 21 stuff. Now that we're going off of that, like, does Dave Aranda need that big a jump, like that good a defense for Baylor fans to be secure in him being the play caller defensively?
That's a really good question.
We kind of pushed aside that he didn't do a great job of that last year.
No, yeah.
Right, but they were winning games.
Yeah, I think definitely, I don't know if it has to be that caliber, but it's got to be pretty close. And I just want to take a quick second and say, during that time when Baylor played in the Sugar Bowl, I was covering Ole Miss. And that was a really, really good Ole Miss offense. I know Lane Kiffin produces great offenses. We saw that a lot with Jackson Dart this year, but that was a really, really, really good group.
Our pal Jeff Lebby was running that thing. And Matt Corral was Jackson Dart before Jackson Dart. Like, they're very similar players. Yeah. Yeah, it was not lost on us. That was a heck of an offense. Like, they played Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship, and those were literally like two of the top 6 or 8 defenses in Division I college football. And then you throw it into Ole Miss, and I know Corral gets hurt, but it wasn't looking great before he got hurt. Like, Jeff Lebby was not getting into his bag, as all the Ole Miss fans around us were saying. Like, that is a huge jump. I mean, that's huge. I don't know if you could make it. Well, I say that they basically made that jump from 2018 to 2019, that kind of jump to becoming an elite defense. But I'm interested to see kind of how that goes with the perception of Aranda, the defensive mastermind.
I think it's going to set the tone for a lot of different things. And like I said, we want to see the actions meet what he's saying. So this is a chance to see that.
It's funny that you say that too, because that sounds like the typical Dave Aranda experience from a fan. Like, we just want to see it play out, because every week in 2023, we heard how great a week in practice they had. And then they lose by 4 touchdowns at home. So we want to get some more of that. Obviously, some of the guys you bring in, Phoenix Jackson, Calvin Simpson Hunt, the defensive backfield needs to get a lot better after what we saw in the LSU game and in the Texas Bowl. A lot of improvement needs to be had, but this is where it starts, Sydney. This is where it starts. Spring football.
Yeah. You mentioned that LSU game too. He said that that's something this team is reminded of quite often here, even in these early practices. And they're not forgetting that heading into spring ball either, and really using that as some new momentum.
I like that. I like that. Put the score up in the locker room.
Yeah. Play it
to call
on
it
the Jumbotron. Like,
to play to my guest here. In 1969, Bo Schembechler had a big ass rug on the floor of the Michigan locker room that just said 50-14 until they beat Ohio State again the next year in one of the great upsets of the decade. Just throwing that out there to show off a little ball knowledge. I'm in on that. What was it? 44-31. I want that everywhere, because they know they missed an opportunity there. America saw, oh yeah, well, of course, Baylor lost to LSU. LSU's in the SEC. Sydney was thinking that under her breath, of course. But I think Baylor really liked their chances in that game, and they also knew they did not show their best effort. So I love to hear that. I would love to see some more of that, and we'll keep you up to date on spring football. Obviously, when we start hearing from the players and hearing from Coach Aranda in the next few days here, but optimism abounds with spring football for the Baylor Bears. Unfortunately, we talked about some basketball. Now some Bears players are heading into the transfer portal, and we might have been able to see that coming. Let's talk about that next on Locked On Baylor. But first, a word from one of our new sponsors over at Supply House. I guess I can't be saying new for that much longer. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast and from coast to coast. You need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH as in Supply House 5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Back here on a Wicker Wednesday, Locked On Baylor, Sydney Wicker joins from KCEN Channel 6. Sydney was in Raleigh. She was out there on the front lines, which takes on almost a literal sense in the next segment. But for now, you were out there, and this is something I had the privilege to do last year. It's an awesome opportunity until the team loses. And then it's part of the job, but it's a tough part. You go into the locker room and you're talking to those players after their seasons have ended, after their college careers have ended, for some of them after their careers have ended, full stop, and they've played their last real basketball game. And now we're starting to see kind of the bottom falling out a little bit. Baylor already had a tall task in terms of how few guys were coming back for next year. In the 2 days and counting since they lost to Duke, they've already lost 2 players that were supposed to come back for next year. Jason Asamoah yesterday, Langston Love on Monday. And Sydney, we shouldn't have been too surprised about that.
I wasn't too surprised about Langston on Monday. I was surprised. If you would have told me that last week, I think I would have been more shocked. But after being inside the locker room, it didn't surprise me too much. I always say the worst day in my career is when I cover a team's loss. And I'm very thankful for that because a lot of my friends on the news side have to cover murders and very serious things. So a loss really isn't that bad, but it does suck for somebody who's emotional and has a hard time asking the tough questions. Sometimes it's not my favorite environment to be in. But when I walked in, a lot of those guys were already really emotional. Some were crying. Jaden Nunn had his head down and was covered with his towel. And then when I interviewed him, asked him just about what it was like wearing the Baylor uniform, he broke down crying. And it just that stings. But Langston just was sitting back. We asked if we could talk to him. He was like, yeah, for a minute. You get a couple quick questions and then we're on with it. You could just tell his attitude and his demeanor was already kind of checked out right then and there. And he had a pretty decent game against Duke. He didn't sit on the bench the whole time. He contributed. He had a couple big threes. He really made an impact in that game. So it's not like he was just sitting there. I understand why Jason wanted to leave. I feel bad for the guy. I think he just wants to play and he deserves that. But for Langston, I don't know. His attitude just really spoke to me right then and there after the game, especially when so many guys had such strong emotions, and for him to be just kind of carefree, if that's the right word. He already seemed a little checked out right then and there.
Interesting, because we know that Langston's a low-key guy. Obviously, you've talked to him. You know that he is that. But as someone who's also been in those locker rooms, and those of you who've watched the press conferences too, it's kind of all thrown out the window. The cool guys are still in there crying. And I'm not going to say, oh, Langston sucks because he wasn't crying. But that's not the point here. But you mentioned it in there. He's been, a key player for them the last 2 games specifically in the tournament. He was terrific for them. Was there any of that before or after the Mississippi State game or in the build-up to the Duke game? Was there anything like that?
Not like this. I think the guys were kind of on a high after the Mississippi State game, especially with it being a closer game. I'm trying to remember. We talked to VJ after that game, and he was in pretty good spirits. Everybody seemed to just be proud that they made it past game one. A lot of people didn't have them picked to go past that first
True.
game. So I think they just kind of had a little bit of maybe swagger that they just were carrying. And the vibes were definitely a lot higher. I didn't necessarily notice any kind of attitude or any kind of differences after that one, but to sense it, right after the game, when I saw the news on Monday, it didn't surprise me.
Was there anything else in the locker room that you were like, not even, I mean, you don't even need to call people out necessarily, but like, not that this is that, but, just like, that's not what I expected from a losing locker room? Or was it just, Langston being a little checked out there, a little one foot on the plane?
Most of the guys, I mean, obviously, guys don't really like to talk after losses
Sure.
anyways. Most of the guys had the towels over their heads and just didn't want to talk. When I first stepped foot in there, I looked around. It was me and some guy who's doing video work for Baylor. I hadn't met him until the tournament. And I was like, I don't even know where to start. Like, everybody's got their heads
Yeah.
covered and, like, doesn't even wanna talk. I'm like, I didn't even know where to begin. But I saw Rob, so I went up to Rob first and started talking to him. He was probably the easiest to talk to, and I'm glad I started right then and there with him. But just the heads were hanging low. I understand for a lot of the guys, it was tough just emotionally for them being their last time. But I would say that was probably Langston's attitude was probably the thing that surprised me the most.
Mm. And I do want to ask about Asamoah in there. We talked about
Mhm.
him. He, you mentioned the playing time. I mean, the guy just didn't get the playing time. He ends up only getting about 6 minutes per game. And I said this in my, kind of initial breakdown yesterday. And I'm curious as to how you think, being around college basketball, a few different programs, is this just the way that college basketball is in 2025 in the sense of, this kid was a four-star recruit, high four-star recruit last year. He committed to Baylor early, right? There was a commitment there pretty early on from both sides. And after 1 year where he's only playing 6 minutes a game, he's saying, screw this. Like, I'm out of here. Is that something that would have happened 7 or 8 years ago when guys were just like, you know what, I'm going to develop under this coach because I came for this coach. And it doesn't feel like college basketball's like that anymore.
Yeah, I do feel like that's a little bit a part of the game. I think NIL has a lot to do with that as
Yeah.
well too, which really sucks, but I just think I don't know, something about Jason that always like stood out to me is that he was always ready to go. Like, he was ready
Yeah.
for his name to be called at any moment. He didn't have numbers that jumped off and, like, surprised you or anything. He did have a couple, moments where he'd get in there and contribute something, but he just, like, didn't make the impact, I guess, and that's probably why Scott didn't have him playing as much or whatever. Like, there's something Scott saw that the rest of us didn't. But I will say, every
Yeah.
time his name was called, like, he was ready to go. Watching him in warm-ups, he was always ready. Seemed like a high energy. So I just kind of wonder if he didn't feel valued or appreciated as a player. So I think his case might be a little different than others, but I do think we're in a situation now where if guys aren't going to go play, they're going to go somewhere they can, which makes sense. But sometimes it takes that time to develop and you got to
Mm.
trust the process. And that's something we know Scott likes to do. He likes to develop his players and take the time and invest in them. But I
Yes.
do that's something we're not seeing anymore. Guys, they want to be the stars. They want the deals. They want the playing time.
Right. And that's a great last point there. I mean, it was all great, Sydney, but that last point especially, like, this is kind of a crossroads for Scott Drew in terms of him and a lot of other coaches. Like, Scott has built his programs primarily on guys who stay 3 or 4 years and they develop, and he got transfers when that was a tougher thing to do because they wanted to learn under Scott Drew and make them into NBA players. And now it's just not really the way the game is played at the power 4 level, or at least at a program of Baylor's caliber. And the other thing too is, like, not to beat a dead horse or anything, but it could be the case, whether you like it or not, that Jason Asamoah is looking at the short-term future of this program and is like, yeah, I don't know. It's 2 years ago when I was committing, it looked like there was another Final Four in our future. And the way it's looking right now, it doesn't for the short-term future. And I'm not going to say they're going to be terrible. They're going to outright miss the tournament, but that's a very different outlook. So yeah, I think those are 2 tough losses for Baylor in terms of dynamic guys who could come back next year, but especially Asamoah, and again, like you said, it was probably going to happen, with just the reality of college basketball nowadays. But anyway, speaking of the reality of college basketball, by the way, Sydney was not just front and center for that Baylor loss to Duke, but she was front and center for the story that you have all read about. Let's get the story behind the story on the UConn SID that could ruin all of our lives at the drop of a hat. Let's talk about it next on Locked On Baylor. But first, let me ask you a question. I think you know what question's coming, don't you? You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. Trust me. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, it gives you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building your wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Or if you're managing money with your partner, it's now smoother than ever to do that. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. My partner's a doctor. I should start sharing accounts with her. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for half off your first year. Sydney Wicker back on the third segment of the show, but also back in Texas after a lovely trip to Raleigh. You know, it's great this time of year. The Carolinas, they're beautiful. The people there, very nice, except for the ones that travel down from a not so nice state of Connecticut. Trust me, those people aren't nice. Massachusetts isn't either, but we're talking about Connecticut right now. So the big story in college basketball is this viral video that goes out Sunday afternoon, right as the Baylor game's tipping off, because it's Dan Hurley coming through the locker room or the tunnel to the locker room where media is allowed to be, and talking to the Baylor players. Hey, hope these refs don't F you the way they F'd us, Baylor. And it's so patented Dan Hurley. Like, no one was surprised to see that. But then, Sydney, as you're doing the Baylor game, you got a front row seat to what transpired next from the UConn SID. Take us there.
So everybody buckle up, because the tea is hot and it's piping after this experience. I have never experienced anything like this in my life. You guys, I feel like, kind of got to know me through this podcast, and I'm chill. I don't like the drama. Cam gives me these crazy questions sometimes. I'm like, Cam, that's not me. Like,
I tee her up for total drama. All the time.
Like, oh, that's a lot. Yeah, I would never survive on reality TV. I'd be so boring. They would send me home immediately. But anyway, so this guy I was sitting next to, his name's Joey Ellis. He's the one who took the video of the guys walking out. You mentioned that was an area he could film in, which is correct. And you're not allowed to film on the arena floor. So I was watching the mascots go back and forth. Bruiser and the Duke mascot had a little moment. And so I did take out my phone. I was taking pictures of them. And since you're not supposed to like be filming anything, I heard somebody say, "Are you Joey Ellis? Did you take the video?" So I put my phone down immediately because I thought somebody was talking to me. I was like, "I'm not doing anything I'm not supposed to do.
I'm not Joey Ellis. I'm not Joey Ellis.
I'm fine. I am a goody two shoes to my core. I follow the rules. Like, I am a listener." And so I was freaking out. And then I turn and he said, "I need you to delete that video." And he says, "I'm not deleting the video." This is an SID talking to him, wearing the UConn gear. Like, you could tell he was affiliated with the university. And then he says, "Well, that was a private conversation," to which Joey says, "There was nothing private about that conversation." And then the SID, who we now know as Bobby Mullen, said, "Well, then I'm going to ruin your life." And I literally, my eyes were wide open. He storms off, walks to the opposite side of the court, and I look over at Joey, and the first thing I says is, "Are you okay?" Because, like, I'm not okay, and he wasn't even talking to me, but I'm scared out of my mind right now. And Joey was just like, yeah, I mean, I'm not deleting the video. It's already been shared and has like over thousands of likes. I literally go on my Twitter and scroll. It's been picked up by so many different pages. TMZ has it at this point. Like Bleacher Report has shared it. ESPN has already got it. Like it's everywhere. The damage done. Like if Joey deletes this video, it doesn't matter. It's already been resurfaced so many times. It's not going anywhere. So I just sat there. I talked to Joey. I ended up having to like do a little video for him as my statement of my experience sitting next to him. It's been a whole.
I'm sure his bosses
situation.
needed that, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sure his bosses were like, okay, what happened? Like
yeah,
what rule did you break? When an SID comes down on you on like that, that's your employer's next question. Okay,
yeah,
what happened? What rule did you break?
exactly. And the SID ended up.
Character witness Sydney Wicker.
I was like, I'm not ready for this. This is not the
Actually, just a
file.
regular witness. Yeah.
I already felt bad because I had moved Joey's stuff. He had it in my spot because he was sitting there from the game before. And so I'd already moved his stuff out of the way. So I felt bad. But I was like, dude, I got to sit here. Like, I got work to do. Like,
Yes.
Baylor's already tipping off. Like, it's time to go. Like, you got to get out of here. But yeah, as he was just sitting next to me. And then he starts getting info from his coworkers that the SID had called his work already and was like saying some things over there. It was a lot, but yeah, not a really good look for UConn.
No. And so Bobby Mullen does not come back, right? He doesn't come back to apologize to Joey in person, nothing
Nope.
like that.
Nope. And Joey sat with me for most of the game. And then after the game, he asked if he could get my phone number because he was like, I'm probably going to need a statement of sorts out of you if you don't mind. And at first I was like, I don't really want to get involved. But then I was also like, well, I can just tell you as a witness, like what I experienced. But like, that's pretty much as far as I want to go. So yeah. And I texted him yesterday to see if he was doing okay. You know, like he's such a nice guy. He's also a fellow Michigander. So like we started talking about Michigan, you know,
talking about
we
the
have a
mitten.
lot to talk about, but yeah, it was really intense for somebody who was just trying to watch her team play and write my web story and take my game notes. It was a lot more than I anticipated happening in my seat on the court side.
That's nuts, man. Sydney becomes like the Al Cowlings of this week, like
Oh,
the Cato Kalin or something. Wow, that's wild, man. And
yeah.
like, I know that's not a Baylor thing, but A, we had Sydney right there in the front lines, and B, like, there but for the grace of God go any of us that have a credential. Like, again, this kid was within his right. Kid, I don't know. This man was within his rights to film that. And, Bobby Mullen had come and said something like it was supposed to be private. It's like, it's not private. Dan Hurley is yelling in the tunnel. Like a fan could have taken that video from behind and picked up the same thing, right?
100%.
Like it's, and it could happen to any of us that happens. And thankfully, I've had some minor problems with Baylor SIDs before, but for the most part, I don't think any of them are going to do that.
No.
And we have some good people working in that department. So hopefully you don't have to worry about that at home, Sydney. But how about that? You've all heard the story this week, and now you get it front and center, how it actually played out. That's nuts.
Yeah, none of it was like everything that was said is exactly what happened. I know his station, Joey's station, like did a story on it pretty much saying this is what happened to our reporter, and the SID Bobby Mullen like released a statement and stuff and just basically said that Joey didn't have to take that video as a journalist because he knows the kind of implications that would have had, and he selfishly did. That was basically what they said. And that's not true. Like, as reporters, we do have to hold coaches, presidents, governors, whoever accountable for their actions. That is part of the job to a certain extent.
Yes.
So he was doing his job. If you're curious, people did the same thing to Scott Drew. They did the same thing to Duke's head coach. Like, as I paid attention after that because I was curious. And I watched everybody do that to every other coach that came through the tunnel or as they were walking out of the locker room. So this was okay. Nobody stopped anyone in there because this is a safe spot to do that.
And that is, by the way, Bobby Mullen saying that's really damning for SIDs everywhere, who I'm sure were cringing hearing that, because the SID has a tough role. It's a thankless role for the most part. I do have sympathy for that, but they are not supposed to be blocking journalism from happening. They are just supposed to be liaisons between, the program, mainly the coaches, and the media. They are not supposed to be blocking the media. They are not supposed to be making the coaches a mirage that never talks to them. That's not what they're supposed to be. They obviously have some brand management, but that statement, when I heard that, I was like, this is not good for our journalists that are out there. It's not necessarily me anymore, but Sydney who's out there. So anyway, thank you for that firsthand
You're
retelling. I like
welcome.
that.
If somebody told me they were gonna ruin my life over video, I just wanna say I would have cried, first of all, because I have no backbone when it comes to things like that.
I mean,
And that's just, first of all, so mean. Like, that
and
is
by the way, that is a position. That's a person in a position of power. Like, thankfully, Joey does
yes.
not cover UConn. But if that was a UConn reporter, like that guy really could ruin his career. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And you had mentioned it, like, an SID's role is to just be there to provide information. I can promise you I know journalists and reporters, the media gets such a bad rep, but
Mhm.
sometimes you just have to report on what you know and what you see. Like,
Yes.
that's part of it.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, it's not always the good news, but we try to make good news when we can. If we want to tell an awesome story about, I ran great sound bites of Rob Wright and VJ talking about their relationship they had playing with each other and what it meant for them to share their freshman year and what kind of big experience that was. That's a great thing to talk about. The stories that I've got to share, that we try to do that as often as we can. We don't want to share the bad news. But when you create things like this, you have no choice but to share
Yes.
it. And it is what it is, unfortunately. But oh man, I'm glad it's over with. Let me just say
Yeah.
that because it was a lot. I was stressed, and I was also stressed just to be sitting there in that area because I was like, if he comes back over here, like, I don't I'm leaving. Like, I don't want any part of
Could have
this
got
fight.
fired
I'm
right
just
now.
yeah. But truly, I was a fly on the wall for that conversation, and wow.
Mm.
That's all I have to say.
Well, we're glad that it didn't happen to you and hope that it
Thanks.
does not. That's for sure. Sydney will be covering some spring football here in the near future. And obviously, for all your Baylor and local sports needs, follow her on Twitter. Check her out on the KCEN website, on the KCEN TV, and the app. It's
Yes,
all
good
there.
job.
It's all there for, yeah. It's all there for her to cover our teams that we love so much. Sydney, thank you so much for joining once again.
Thanks for having me, Cam. Good to see you as always.
As always, another great Wicker Wednesday in the books. Thank you guys so much for joining. And we will see you tomorrow as we're going to talk some more basketball transfer portal tomorrow, what Baylor needs to look at. That's coming up tomorrow on Locked On Baylor.